Thank you. Good evening. It's just started 5:02 this evening, and welcome to Beaumont City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. In City Council chambers, Councilor Swain is coming from downtown. Conditions on the roads are not great. He'll be here as fast as he possibly can. So we'll begin with the 5 of us. There will be 6 at the end of the night. Councilor Tellenbus is out of town on business. He cannot join us this evening, so there'll be 6 of us. So just a point of order, when we have 6 of us, anytime there's a vote, if the vote is tied, the motion or the vote is defeated. That's our standard procedure. So just for the record, that's how we'll be doing it. We'll have 6 this evening when Sam does join us when he gets here. All right, first of all, a lot of acknowledgement as we begin our meeting here. The City of Beaumont respects the histories, languages, and culture of all First Peoples of this land, whether it be a First Nation, Métis, or Inuit descent, and appreciates that their presence continues to enrich vibrant communities across the land. As we gather here in Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis Nation, we acknowledge that we are all treaty people and have ongoing responsibilities to protect, honor the treaty, the inherent rights of the people, and the land. We'll now adopt the agenda for this evening. Madam Clerk, could you please put the agenda on the screen? Or Ms. Plashy, thank you. I'll move that the January 21st, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting agenda be adopted as presented. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, members of council, would you please initiate the voting process? Unanimously, 5-0 in favor of the motion. Thank you. Next on our agenda is adopting the minutes. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes? Councillor Barnhart, would you wish to make that motion?
Yes, Mayor, glad to make the motion that November 19th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes be adopted as presented.
Thank you, Councillor. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, would you please initiate the voting process? Council, would you please vote on the motion to adopt the minutes?
November seems like a long time ago.
It does, actually. And that carries unanimously, 5-0 in favor of the motion. Thank you, Council. Oh, I just got on my thing here. Hang on a second. Give me 1 second to get back on my screen. I seem to have canceled it for some reason. Here we go. Thank you. Next on our agenda is open forum. Madam Clerk, any open forum guests this evening? I'm not aware of any. Have any registered before noon today for open forum? Let's see, I got you. There you are.
No, Mayor, register open forums.
Thank you. All right, Council, next on our agenda is our presentation of 5.1 2025 Grant Funding Program. Ms. Cuthbert and Mr. Lazaruk, I believe you present this evening. Are you going to join us here or stay at your seat, which is fine? Okay, let me just get your microphone on, and it is on. We're good to go. Thank you.
Excellent. Good evening, committee. I'm Amanda Cuthbert, Manager of Recreation and Culture. This evening, I have a report for you on the 2025 Grant Funding Program. That also includes details of the major and operating grants. This evening, I'm looking for direction on 2 items. I'd like to know Council's direction on how to allocate funds for all 4 grant programs, and I would like to know how Council's direction on how you would like the major and operating grant dollars allocated. The background on how we got here: on January of 2024, Council approved Policy C-52, the Municipal Grant Funding Program. Administration implemented the program partially according to the policy. The microgrant program has not been implemented yet. Arts grant and community grants were implemented and allocated funds throughout the year. Major and operating grant went through its first intake of applicants. On October 15th, applicants presented their ask to Council for 2025 to 2027 for the major and operating grants. During budget deliberations, Council discussed and deferred this topic to this meeting today. Overview of the program. The grant policy was created to address opportunities to improve the administration of the municipal grant programs. The policy also allows Council the opportunity to annually evaluate supports through conversations and evaluation process, as grant funding levels will be set annually based upon asks and subsequent supporting decisions. The policy breaks out 4 distinct streams: major and operating, arts grants, community grants, and micro grants. This evening, I'm asking for direction on how to allocate dollars for all 4 grant funding streams for the 2025 operating year. We have come up with a recommendation to start the conversation. Our recommendation to distribute the funds as follows: operating and major projects, $130,000; Arts grants, $90,000. Community grants, $80,000. Micro grants, $0. This is for a total amount of $300,000 that has been budgeted for 2025. In this recommendation, funding the microgrants has not been allocated for 2025. This program has not yet commenced, and in its implementation can be deferred to 2026. The budget for arts grants has been reduced to allow for an increase in funding for the community grant program, which has experienced a higher number of applicants over the last year. The second part of this report is major projects and operating grant funding allocation. Administration recommends the major and operating grant funds be broken out as listed in the chart in the report. This recommendation was developed based on the following considerations. Positive impact to the community, aligns with Council's strategic objectives, ensuring continuity to the previous funded groups, allocating funds to the greatest number of groups. There are 5 applicants not recommended to be funded through the major and operating grant program. These groups are eligible and may apply to the community and/or grants program. As you can see from the chart, we're not recommending allocation of the full funds for 26 and 27. This approach allows the major and operating grant program to accept new applications in the next few years and provides Council with the flexibility to adjust and distribute of funding across all grant programs in future years. Administration is requesting direction from the committee on how to allocate the major and operating grant funds for 2025 to 2027. And I am happy for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cuthbert. Appreciate that. Very good report. It does outline a lot of good priorities based on our strategic plan and our policy we passed, gosh, almost a year ago now, last January. So any questions for Ms. Cuthbert? I will probably talk you now on our procedure for tonight. I'm talking to the Madam Clerk. So there's 2 recommendations we make to Council tonight for next Council meeting. First recommendation is to approve the amount of $300,000, which is broken down by 130, 90, 80, as Ms. Cuthbert outlined. That's as part of our budget process, more of a housekeeping item, but that's what we need to do. And the second recommendation is based on the report on the breakdown of how the 130,000 is allocated for 2025, and then the subsequent years of 2026 and 2027. Okay, so we'll have those 2 recommendations. So at this time, I'll entertain questions for Ms. Cuthbert on her on her presentation. Councillor Penrod, you have the floor first, followed by Councillor Van Newkirk, followed by Councillor Barnhart. Councillor Penrod, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Daniluk, and I appreciate the report, Ms. Cuthbert, and understand that there's lots of other people working behind the scenes on this, and just also like to say thank you for your patience to all the folks that made presentations back in November. I know that our deferring the decision has an impact on your organizations, and but I think it's important that we give all the applications the proper consideration and come to a good decision as a whole. So I think deferring this discussion was the right decision, but just wanted to acknowledge that it does have impacts on the organizations affected. So I'd like to start at a high level, and then I think we'll have some further conversation regarding some of the individual allocations that are recommended. On a high level, I'm understanding that $300,000 is a significant amount. It's the beginning of a generous grant funding program, but as our community grows and as it also becomes more diverse and complex, that $300,000 I don't think is going to be sufficient. Frankly, it's probably not sufficient this year, but this is going to be a problem, in my view, that we need to tackle over several budgets until we get to a place where we feel that it's more sustainably funded. So the first, I guess, idea that I'd like to place on the table for my colleagues to respond to a little bit, and for administration to feedback as well, how we might go about this, would be to consider. So I guess I would just start by saying I'm in favor of keeping the funding at $300,000 for the 2025 year. We had some conversation, we debated it at budget around how this number might be enlarged. And through those conversations, we came to a decision as council, and I accept that decision. So that's where I'm at for the 2025 budget. But I wonder if we were to apply an annual escalator to that number of somewhere in the range of 2 to 5%, how that would impact. And so I just ran some basic numbers on that. And essentially that would put us somewhere in between what we would anticipate inflation to be. So it just kind of recognizes that all of these organizations that are applying for grants have to deal with the cost of living and inflation impacts on their organizations, just as we do in the city of Beaumont. So the lower end might recognize that. Maybe another way to index it would be to think about the percentage increase in our tax roll. And I'm probably using the wrong technical language there. What I really mean is, as we add new homes and new businesses, our tax levy goes up. Not the percentage, but
The assessed value.
the assessed value goes up. And so there would be a percentage of that every year, and there might be an opportunity to link the escalator that I'm suggesting to that number.
Okay, on that point, Councillor Penrod, tonight's discussion is on the $300,000 for 2025. If we're going to talk about escalating for 2026, 2027, Ms. Morrison should not be part of our next year's budget deliberations, not this evening. If I'm incorrect, please correct me, but that's my understanding. We should be focusing on tonight's situation. Oh, hang on. I think I have the wrong mic for you. Yes, your microphone is on.
Yes, Mayor, it would be a discussion, because if you're looking at actual funding choices for any future years, we would want to have that when we're discussing that budget. Or if you would like to ask administration to prepare some information in anticipation, of course, of the 2026 budget, that is also an available option.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. I'll leave it there,
Okay.
Mayor. I just wanted to suggest it and be kind of on the record up with as far as where I'm at with the 2025 number. I think that's enough said there. The other piece that I wanted to address is the micro grant, currently recommended as unfunded. I'd rather not delay another year in launching the micro grant. In my opinion, I think the micro grant is an opportunity to address ideas in the community that are innovative in a way that's flexible and readily responsible. So if somebody has a really good idea that's not going to cost a lot of money to do, a neighborhood barbecue or neighbor building event or something to that effect, I would love to see that be able to be funded this year. And I'd like us to get this, to stand it on its feet and start debugging it as soon as possible. And so as we look in a year where there's an election coming, I would just think that if we could fund this even partially, it would be a way of giving that next council all the data points that we can. And so just looking from administration, maybe I'm not anticipating some of the cost or staff time to stand that program up, and just wondering if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, of course, through the chair. Certainly it is going to be a wonderful program, and I think we're all looking forward to it because it'll do just that. It is a little less red tape and get some funding to people for some smaller projects. We absolutely can get that done this year. I think the majority of the time, I would say beginning of Q3, we could do it. The majority of that time is going to be advertising and communicating to the public, I think would be the most of it. As far as getting the administrative of it, I don't think that's going to take too much work. So I think we do have the ability and capabilities of getting that running this year. We probably would just kick it off probably midway through the year.
Thank you. And so my suggestion would be, and would be lots of ways to do it, and as I said, I think the important thing is to stand it on its feet, whether we fund it fully at 10,000 or maybe partially at 5,000, knowing that it's going to take some time to get the communication to the community that it's even available. Maybe we fund it for essentially half the year at 5,000. But we've already, in the proposal, we're already contemplating moving some of the allocations around a little bit from what the 2024 numbers were. So my suggestion would be that we look at 130,000 for the operating and major projects as recommended by administration, and look at a small adjustment to the arts and community grants to bring them to 85,000 and 75,000 respectively. That would fully fund the micro grant for 2025. But I'd certainly, I'm interested to hear what you all think, and I'll leave it there. Thanks, Mayor.
Okay. So let's just take a moment. I know I've got Steve and then Kathy on questions, but we've now got a situation arisen with Councillor Penrod's comments about maybe adjusting the 300,000 to put money towards a micro grant. So let's deal with that quickly here if we can first before we go on to the questions going on any further. Is there any thoughts from members of council on the issue of, as raised by Councillor Penrod, to reduce arts and community by whatever amounts to allocate money for micro grants, keeping the total at 300,000 as per our budget we've already passed? Any thoughts on that? Anybody in favor of that? Okay, so I'm going to erase the seats right now and just redo the speaking order based on this topic. Come back into you, Steve, then back to Kathy. Kathy, you have the floor on this issue.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Penrod, for the thoughts that you've shared. On the particular issue of the micro grants, because we'll come back to the other ones later, while I don't mind getting it up and running, my concern would be taking it from those other pots, because I think those other pots also will not be sufficient for the people that are not successful in getting their grants through the major and operating. Will be looking to go into the community and the arts. So while I'm not opposed to the idea of getting it started, I would look at perhaps a different proposal, and that would be to get the policy work done perhaps in 2025 and the funding in, excuse me, in 2026, because there is already, if we accept what's in front of us, there will be some funds available in the second year in 2026 that could go to the micro funds. I'm just reluctant to support taking it out of arts and community.
So you're no to changing the allocation? You're no?
I'm a no in the current, if that's the only option, then I'm a no.
Yeah, that's the only option. You'll have to change the budget, which I'm not.
For 2025, that would be the only option.
So that's a no.
Yeah.
Okay, just for clarifying, moving things
Not
along.
because I don't agree with his intention, but I don't want to take the money.
I agree with the principle, but not the way
That's right.
we'd have to do it for this year. Fair enough. Other members of council speaking in favor or against the suggestion by Councillor Penrod to adjust the 300,000 in a different allocation method? Seeing none, I'm not in favor of it either for the reasons Councillor Barnhart mentioned. So seeing no support for that, we'll leave the operating at 130, arts at 90,000, community grants at 80,000. And I'll move on then to Councillor Van Newkirk. You had the floor next for comments or questions from Ms. Cuthbert's presentation. Thank you, Councillor Penrod. Councillor Van Newkirk, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry. Brief but really informative report tonight. And one of the things that you said, and I don't want to be overlooked, is the fact that the 26, 27 weren't completely prescribed because we don't know other things that might come or change priority or be reprioritized along the way. So I think it's important in this process to note that that flexibility has been left in for 26 and 27 because we don't know what we don't know at this point. So I just didn't want that part to be overlooked in any way. Just if you could remind us in a little bit more of an explanation how the process of the allocations went to get to the point where the suggestions are put on here. Committee work, administration work, a number of submissions. If you could just walk us through that process just a little bit more detailed.
Are you referring to how the 130 was allocated?
Yeah, just how we got to the 130, 90, 80, 0, right? Like, folks, put applications into the different streams, then they were compiled, and like, just if you could walk us through the process of what administration did to get to the point to this suggestion here.
Sure. Hopefully I don't get my numbers wrong. I'm going to try my best.
It's less about the numbers and more about the process.
Sure, no problem. So in the beginning of 2024, the policy was changed. So this addressed kind of all the funding streams. So as far as the major and operating grants, prior to 2024, We did have ongoing operational grants that were given to very specific groups, and it was kind of ongoing over the years, became historical, and those dollars were always allocated to those groups. What this policy did is that opened it up to be more of an application process. So what that turned into be is in June, there was expression of interest application that was due. So anyone that was interested in doing a major project or was looking for an operating grant, there was an expression of interest that was due. So that gave administration an idea of who's all out there, who's wanting to apply, what that's going to look like, and give us a rough idea of numbers. September 1st, I believe, was the deadline to finish your final application and submit all your financials and required documents to administration to go into the process. So I believe off the top of my head, we had about 17 applications in total for the major and operating projects. Prior to that, we were only funding 5, I believe. Is that correct? 5 people. So there was a huge need. So I think, it was a good time to make the change. There's obviously a need in the community for some more support in other areas. So then that took us to, after the application process, the groups were all given the opportunity to present to council and pitch their ideas and what they were looking for the year. So, or for the next future 3 years, I guess. So that gave council an idea, and I could ask some questions about the application and the groups and how those dollars would be spent. So typically following that process, the next step would be during budget deliberations for the council to come together and have a conversation. Now that they have all the information, they knew what the need was out there in the community because they've seen that presented to them in front of them. And then you can make the decision whether you want to increase the budget, the grants dollars, keep it the same, or allocate it however you wish. So that's kind of the process and vision around that policy change. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that gets us to, through the meat and potatoes of it, and then through that process, they were prioritized and, jockeyed about to get to the point where it was, these are the folks who are proposed to be funded, and, and then there was a 3-year look, I think, which is also a new piece that provides a lot of value to the community organizations to see what future commitment could look like. All of this could change at any point in a budget process and in a policy, with a policy lens, so, yeah.
Yep, you're correct.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think the only question that I have would be around the process for applications next year. So everything that you just said, administration has went through. Do you foresee any changes to the process, to the communication, to the intake? Have you received some feedback from organizations of things to contemplate changing, improving, modifying next year, and what might that look like?
Yes, we certainly received some feedback. First thing that we're going to do is relook at the application process. We're going to tweak a few things there, try to make it a little bit easier and a little less onerous on the group. So that was a big one. I mean, some of them are asking for a lot of dollars, so you do want to make sure you're capturing and collecting all the right information and doing our due diligence. But I think there's going to be something that we do there to try and make that situation a little bit easier. I think once we kind of get through the next couple months, we're looking at kind of updating our website, making sure all the information for all the grants, all the timelines, all the deadlines, so everyone sees all of it. We also want to make sure that it's very clear on which grant process you should apply for, depending on what your project or operational need is. Because I think there's been a little bit of confusion there, so I think we need to provide some clarity, possibly even some training, maybe some meetings, things like that. So a big one is going to be a lot of communication to those groups, making sure the right information is out there for them. Then I think as far as the rest of the process, it will probably be very similar as far as the deadlines for applications, presenting to council, that aspect of it. But there will be definitely some improvements we're going to try and make, which I suspect we'll do every year. We'll always see some.
Yeah, I've always appreciated administration looking back at process and wanting to make improvements, time after time, year after year, so that's great. And what I would say, the feedback that I've got on this process will be captured in some of the changes that you talked about relative to clarity about what grant stream to apply to. I think that's where well, it is the only concern that I've heard from 3 different groups now is just continuity and clarity about which grant pool to fund into, and if I would have known that I could have only got that much there, should I have applied to another grant? I don't know, talk to administration, right? Like, I don't have the answers to those questions, but I think providing the clarity that you're talking about, or just trying to be a little more clear on that would help groups, so, yeah. So just, that's kind of my comments and questions at a high level, Mayor, and look forward to any other discussions that any councillors would bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. Councillor Barnard, followed by Councillor McCook. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. And administration, you prefaced my question with saying that I really do appreciate how much has gone into this over the years. Like, this has been a work in progress, and council has been doing its best, and the administration has been responding and responsive to the needs of the community. So I see us making great improvements each year, and we're getting better and better at it. Particular question, I think it's similar to what I'm hearing my colleagues on council saying as well, is that some of the confusion that I heard in the community was around, here's a major operating grant worth $100,000, when you make an application for something big, and all of these groups have great big visions and want to achieve great things. And then to get $5,000 out of that, when you put in probably $50,000 worth of sweat and tears, seems a bit hard to take. And I say that with utmost respect, for I know what you're trying to do, and what we're trying to do is to spread it out over as many groups as we can. But I worry a bit, and this is where the future, how will this go? $5,000 these days, it used to be a lot of money. It's not a whole heck of a lot of money now when you're trying to buy insurance, pay for accounting, pay for an audit, do this, do that. Like, it's a lot. So I guess my concern is around calling it a major grant and then not giving out funds that are kind of in that pot. Has there been any thought given to whether or not, like you say, is it the redirecting people to those proper pots, and what thoughts have you had on that? Further to what you've said, just elaborate a little bit more on that for me, because I think there is still confusion about where do you go for what?
Yeah, I think trying to explain that, I think, is the best bet. I think a lot of the groups that did apply to the major and operating, I think they applied to the right one, I believe. When you look at the funding dollars that they applied for, the community and the arts grants have lower amounts of maximum. So I think that could be part of the confusion. It might be some of the information that we need to share and clarify. Because, yeah, some of the groups that are looking for more than $10,000, the major and operating grant program would be the main one for them to go to. The other ones would not, they wouldn't be able to qualify for that much funding from those groups. I understand what you're saying as far as, if I ask for $100,000 and I get $5,000, I might not be able to do what I want to do, whether it's operationally or a major project. So I do understand that challenge. I don't have a great answer for you other than looking at, what we might be able to do to change the policy down the road. Is there minimums we put in? Right now, we don't have minimums that we will disperse. There's maximums. I just don't have a lot more of a solution for you right now.
You're getting my point, which is if it's an operating grant and you're getting $5,000, it's better than not getting any dollar. But exactly what, when your dream was to kind of really ramp up, and that's what you get. It's kind of like you can't go too far with that in 1 year. Maybe after 3 years you might be able to, but so it's good that it's 3 years. I think that certainly is helpful for some of the groups that are in that situation. But again, that was kind of my major concern about if it's a major operating grant, maybe $5,000 it just doesn't fit there. Maybe there should be a minimum of some kind, and and that would be something to look at, because it's going to be a challenge for groups to. What do you do now if you got $5,000? So how is administration going to relay that to the groups that, well, you asked for 50, 60, and you got 5, so what are you going to expect from what is the administration going to expect to be delivered for that 5? You know what I mean? Like, it's just really difficult for me to get my head around that, and I think that's what the questions are going to come back to the administration around. Okay, thank you for the money, but that's, we asked for this, and that is, so again, I think the good news is we're working towards things like the event strategy, which will, I think some of the funding here was for events, not necessarily for operating. It was mixed in together in those
in some of those applications, correct.
I know in at least 3 different instances that was the case. So I have lots of thoughts and comments, but I don't think in terms of questions other than the thinking which you shared. And I do know that a lot of thought goes into it, and we're trying to build such a vibrant community, and the community is keeping us moving in that direction. So I do hope that groups will be patient, and as we get this to kind of work better, it will increase in its ability to reach the outcomes that everyone wants to reach. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCook. Kat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and I think as we, this is a new process, as we know, and so as we work through this, I certainly appreciate all my colleagues' questions and concerns around this, and I know that administration will tweak the process and we'll get it right and down better each time that we go through it. Councillor Barnhart kind of went down the path that I was going to go down. So do we know, or have we considered the impact to any of the groups who may receive some of the funding but not the total amount of funding? Do we know if they'll still be able to follow through with what they've put forward?
Yeah, I'm not for certain. We haven't reached out to them to let them know and have those conversations, of course, at this point in time. When we looked at the ones we put on the approval list, a lot of them were operational, so they could go to multiple different areas. So the $5,000 could go to help paying for their operations. I think there was one for sure that went to a major project or purchase. So we did recommend that one is fully funded, so that it's hard to buy half a tractor. So that one, is, we did recommend to the full amount. So we can't say for 100%. The groups ultimately, when we move into a funding agreement, would have the option to say, you know what, sorry, I need $100,000, not $5,000. I can't move forward. And then they could say, no, I don't want to accept that. That's very unusual, but that could happen.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And I guess on the basis of that, and to follow Councillor Barnhart a little bit, do we know how we're going to measure success and, kind of that reporting back as to if they say, yeah, okay, we'll still take it, but maybe they can't apply it to exactly what they were looking for? Are we still, how are we kind of measuring that?
I haven't looked at the funding agreement recently. It was a while that I took a look at that. I believe that in the funding agreement, it does say, dollars will be used towards operating expenses or something like that. And we're also looking at having them do a one-page report kind of annually over the 3-year period if they get multi-year funding, so that there is a little bit of accountability so that they are reporting back.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will provide some feedback as well, too. With Mr. Lazaruk coming on board as another resource for these grant programs, it's been well received by a number of grant applicants. The process, although it's a new process, it was in some ways a bit difficult for some groups, but administration gave lots of support to these groups, is my understanding, answered many questions, spent time with them one-on-one to assist them. And the objective of the grant program from council is to help these local nonprofit groups do what they do best and provide entertainment for our residents, for services and so on. And so we want to make sure these grants are allocated as best we possibly can. And I think having a dedicated resource has been very, very helpful. And thank you for your work on this, Ms. Lazaruk and other people in the department, Amanda, of course, and Paul as well. So it's been very well received. So seeing no further questions, Councillor Pinrod, you have a question on this? You have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. It's maybe just following some of what you said and some of what Councillor Barnhart mentioned as well. Several of these grant proposals were envisioning increasing the capacity of the organizations by hiring some sort of administrative support. And it occurs to me that Council did vote to amend the 2025 budget in order to actually put in place some more city resources to do that, not for individual organizations, but to help out globally organizations within Beaumont. So just wondering if you could speak to how you would envision that new resource helping some of the organizations you've been dealing with, and how that, knowing that, has maybe impacted some of your recommendations for how to fund or not fund different applications. Thank you.
Yes, through the chair. We are in planning mode as far as that new position and what that looks like. It'll be a shared role, but the responsibilities will be under sponsorship and CVO support. So we haven't come up with a unique name, but we are starting to craft that job description and get things ready to go. The vision there is really this person will be able to spend some time working with the user groups, understanding what their challenges are. We do hope we'll see them at some of their board meetings and to have some really good conversations, understanding where the challenges are. That's going to take a little time to kind of understand in the whole community where the biggest challenges are. We do know that there is a lot of services that we can bring in, especially through the province, where there's like nonprofit training, things like that we can look at. We know there's some things available. Until we understand kind of the mix of what the needs are, that we'll slowly start seeing some of that. I think when it comes to grant support, filling out the grant applications, we are hoping to provide, with having more capacity, some more meetings and some more one-on-ones and having some of those conversations. Prior to the application being submitted. It's kind of tough after the application is already in. So we do hope to be able to offer some of those opportunities for groups as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Ms. Cuthbert, for the presentation and the questions from Council and the answers, of course, as well, too. So we'll proceed now with the rest of our evening. I'll kind of recoup this now for Sam's benefit. You came in for a bit late, but hopefully the traffic wasn't too bad. So we have two things to do this evening. The first recommendation to Council for next week's Council meeting will be to approve the $300,000 allocation we've already discussed in our 2025 budget, which I'll make the motion myself. A recommendation to Council, and we'll debate it. The second one is to recommendation to Council for the report itself for the 2025, 2026, and 2027 funding models. And I'll get to that when we get to that part of the meeting. So with that, Madam Clerk, could you please put the first recommendation on the screen? I'll make it, and then Council, we can debate it and then vote accordingly. The amount of $300,000 as recommended by administration outlined in the 2025 grant funding report dated January 21st, 2025 be approved. I won't speak to any further. I already have in the early part of our meeting. So any discussion or questions from members of Council on this motion to approve the $300,000 in our budget? Seeing no discussion, would you please initiate the voting process? Council, would you please vote on the recommendation to Council for next week's Council meeting? Sam, Council, that motion carries 5-1, 5 in favor, 1 opposed. Councillor Penrod in opposition. Thank you, Council. Next, could you please put the next recommendation on the screen, and I'll move it, and then we can debate it accordingly. Recommendation to Council that the distribution of the major and operating grant allocation be implemented in accordance with the Council Policy C-52 and as recommended by administration as outlined in the 2025 grant funding report dated January 21st, 2025. At this point, we'll take questions or comments from members of Council or debate on this. Now, just so we're clear, Council, it's in the report. As you see, that has 3 columns, 2025, 2026, and 2027. The 2026 and 2027 funding amounts are not fully allocated, as outlined in the report, to provide flexibility for next year's Council to make any changes they see fit. The 2025 recommendation does total $130,000, as allocated in the policy we just passed a moment ago. And so if a member of Council wanted to change any allocations in that 2025, it would take away from another group in that same column. So just so we're clear, if you want to move money around, someone based on this recommendation list as we see it, they must take away from somebody else in this list. That's how it works, okay? So having said that, let's open the floor. Councillor Barnhart, you have the floor, Kathy, followed by Councillor Monkoff-Swain.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you clarified it for me because this motion clearly says 2025, but I just want to make sure I asked this question and it's really clear. While we have a a report in front of us that is making a recommendation for 26, 27, and we're accepting this report as information, we are not making that concrete at this point in time. 26 and 27 may still get changed in the future.
Correct.
That was my clarification. Is there? Go ahead.
Ms. Cuthbert?
Yes, thank you. I think we may need to make some tweaks because I think the direction that we're asking for this evening is to determine how these funds for the next 3 years, 25, 26, and 27, will be allocated. So we may need to tweak that.
Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Chair. So to clarify, the motion references Council Policy 52, and in accordance with the Council Policy, there's 3 years of approval for the funding. So it references being distributed in accordance with the Council Policy.
Okay, so just so we're clear, okay? So in columns where 2026 and 2027 have numbers in them, some don't, for example, but those that do, they're not written in stone, but I guess they are written in stone for a lack of way of, just provide clarity, okay?
So approving those would be approving them in accordance with council policy. So you would be allocating funds to those groups for 25, 26, and 27 as outlined in the chart. The opportunity, and Ms. Cuthbert can correct me if I'm wrong, the opportunity to make adjustments would be that they aren't fully funded. They aren't fully using the $130,000 funding for major and operating grants. And there's also opportunity when council approves their 26 and 27 budgets to increase the total pot as well. So the amounts to those groups are set in stone, but the total amount may shift.
So in that sense, it's not written in stone. Correct. Roots of certainty, but council has options. The next council has options in the future to make any changes they see fit based on their interpretation of the policy and any policy changes they may want to make. Okay, are you comfortable with that answer? No problem, I'll continue, please.
Sorry, just to make sure, again, that I'm crystal clear, to the administration, under any circumstances, what might be those circumstances where a group might not get the second or third year funding? I mean, I could think of obvious one if they cease to exist, but we're saying it's all things being equal, they're providing the service, they would get the funding. That's something they can count on.
That's correct, and we would enter into a multi-year funding agreement with them so that they would get that reoccurring. Reasons why they might not is exactly what you said. They might cease to exist. They might, if they're no longer a nonprofit or they lose their society status, something else along that line. Didn't provide proper documentation as far as what some of those requirements are that you would normally see on an annual basis. The other thing is we might delay some of the funding if they didn't come back, follow up with their annual report. So that might be delayed. But other than that, no. Next year's council can't go back and say, no, food bank, we're not going to give those dollars. We will be entering into a multi-year agreement with them.
Okay, that helps me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor, for clarifying.
Yeah. So for example, if next year's council decides to allocate 175 instead of 130, there's more money to allocate. Those amounts could change then. Okay? Thank you. Councillor Monkoff-Swain. Sam, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. Figured I should start to contribute at some point. So thanks for that explanation, because I think there's the tendency to think just in 25, and all the future councils will think about that. But the whole purpose of this is so that those groups can plan based on what is approved here. So I get the concept. I like where that's going. I don't know if everyone's going to be happy with that, with the outcome, but I get the concept. So that's clear in my mind. My question, and I didn't quite see much in here, and again, I missed the first 10 minutes, but some feedback. Obviously, each group had a chance to come in and give their information. This is now, this kind of recommendation is public. And obviously it'll go forward to next week for a final. Have you heard any feedback from them? Has anyone reached out? Have we shared kind of our recommendation with them? I'm just curious on if we're planning to go back and say, hey, just FYI, this is kind of where we landed in terms of administration's recommendation, and council's voting on that on Tuesday. Has any of that conversation happened?
No, we did not share the recommendation with them prior, so this would have been public knowledge as of Friday, I believe. So, I mean, they may have seen this at this point in time. So we have had no feedback over the weekend or yesterday or today that I am aware of. So I have not heard anything.
Yeah, I guess my point is most people, aside from a few of us, most people don't live on the agenda website and wonder what's coming up. I'm trying not to direct you to reach out and tell you what to do, but I would hate to get to next Tuesday or after next Tuesday and then them say, well, if I only knew, right? Like presumably we've got their email addresses. I think after today, council's had a discussion around this, just so you know, like this is here, and then that at least gives them a heads up, and if they want to come and do an open forum and say this is why we can't, right, before we make that final decision. So, yeah, I don't want them to come back and say, well, if only I knew, I would have come in and explained, I would have had another shot at it, right? And I know that's not what necessarily administration wants, because you're like, let's get this process done, but I think some of these numbers might catch a few of these groups by surprise, and I think we should hear from them on that.
Mr. Suter, would you care to offer some
Yeah,
comments?
good evening. Thank you. Through the chair, I have actually spoken with two groups, just by chance. They asked, and I did share that we had recommended support in the amount that they were used to. It relieved a little bit of anxiety just from their operations perspective. So that was just by chance in the last, I think, 2 to 3 weeks where we were headed with that. So just so that they would, avoid that panic that I think they were starting to feel. So
Appreciate that. And I will be more direct. The Blues and Roots Festival has had 50K consistently for a long time, and now it goes 50, 40, 30, right? Is that one of the groups that you've spoken with?
yes.
Okay, thank you. I got
Councillor?
That's all I needed to hear.
I appreciate
Thank
your
you.
comments on that. Councillor Penrod, you have the floor, Phil.
Thank you, Mayor. So just a question around a particular application that came in that we had some conversation around at the time that we interviewed was from the Beaumont Chamber of Commerce. So they had both an operating aspect and a major project aspect. And if I recall, the major project aspect was the highway signage. Am I recalling that correctly? Yeah. And so I remember, I think it was Councillor McCook that asked the question at that time if there would be another way to fund that, maybe in a similar fashion to the way the signs to the north of Beaumont were funded. As I recall, the city essentially loaned the money, which was paid back by the chamber over time, and then the chamber has a contract essentially to manage them, if I remember that. So just wondering if we have more clarity, because that project isn't recommended to be funded here. It's not addressed at all.
Yeah, you're correct. I do recall that was part of their application process, or one of their asks. I do not have an answer for you on that process or that project to what you're referring to. I don't know if anyone else here does.
Yeah, even if there was a sense how it was the North project was funded, if that came from ECDEV or, and is that something that I should make a councillor inquiry about, or you could just get back to me on this question?
I don't know if you can see me on the screen, but I could answer.
Hey, Jennifer.
Hi.
Jennifer McDev is on the line, so we didn't see your pic. Jennifer, would you please offer some comments, Ms. Niesing, on Councillor Penrod's question, please?
So the signage to the north was paid through an agreement where it was paid back to the city without interest. And that was over a term. And that was initially what the chamber was looking for. When the grant opportunity came forward, a grant is obviously more profitable for the chamber. So they rightfully so went for that. I would suspect that if they're not successful in the grant, that they may come back with an ask, but I'm on the chamber board and I can talk to them about those next steps moving forward. We still need some clarity around what would be permissible for signage in the south, so there's a bit of work to do there yet. But we can work with them on it, and we're happy to help them explore other options should this not be the right route.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that piece didn't get missed. Thanks for your attention there. And I guess the other piece, if we have a recommendation to shift the numbers at all, or a suggestion to shift, now's the time to do that?
Now's the time, if you got support from other
Sure.
councillors to move. But remember, if you move something, someone else loses something, right?
Yeah, I totally understand
Okay.
that. So my suggestion would be to, and again, this is just based on my own impression, reading the initial grant applications and hearing from the different groups. I read all of the applications. I kind of came up with a rubric and ranked them. And then I take administration suggestions into the mix there. Part of my further rationale for this is exactly the notion that grant funds the impact of grant funds aren't perfectly elastic. So if I had an idea for 25K, this is further to Councillor Barnhart's point, if I had an idea for 25K and the impact of that was going to be 100%, getting 5K doesn't necessarily mean that I can deliver 20% of what it was. And so just understanding what I understand about these organizations, my suggestion would be to move the $5,000 for 25, 26, 27 from the Drive Happiness organization to the Rise Up Society.
All right, council, we have a suggestion on the floor. Any discussion on the suggestion? I'm going to need maybe more reason, more rationale on why you want to do that. I've got enough what you've said personally, but I'll let other councillors maybe weigh in first. Kath, I know your hand's up. I'll come back to you at a later. Or you want to talk about this right now?
It fits with that.
Okay, then you have the floor, Kathy, followed by Councillor Monkoff-Swain.
My question might help a little bit.
Okay.
The three on our list, Drive Happiness, Baba Nanak, and Rise Up Society, again, to me, fit with our FCSS program more so than, in my mind, the major operating grants. But I realized there was no place for them to go, so I appreciate why they've applied for it. And I was just wondering, I thought it was in here, but then I can't seem to find it now. There was some talk at one point, perhaps at the previous meeting, that these types of grants could be looked at through FCSS. Again, I recognize timing and provincial funding and all of those kind of constraints, but I wonder if you could speak to that, because there were, other than these three, I know there were a couple of others as well that I think applied that would fit under FCSS. So is there any opportunity for, and this is where I think it fits with where Councillor Penrod is going, I Drive Happiness, again, I think they're a worthwhile organization, ending source, or deal with it another way.
Yes, great question. And I do believe there's a few on this list that you're mentioning that have applied through FCSS. Those decisions haven't been made for 2025 just yet. So I don't have an answer to you. That process is happening right now. So it's kind of at the same time. So I don't have a great answer to you to send them. The next intake for those FCSS grants, which I do want to make sure everyone knows that it is very separate. It's not included in the grants policy. That is separate because it does use provincial funds, so they have their own requirements to provide grant dollars to and programming. The next intake for that would be at the end of 2025 for 2026. So we can't guarantee that the FCSS dollars are going to go to one or all three of these groups. I don't have that answer for you today. And then their next intake would be for FCSS, like I said, would be at the end of 2025. And as far as other options, the community grants does not have the ability to fund operational expenses. It's more events and projects, those kind of things. The arts grant is a little bit different, where arts grants, you can get grant money for operations, for events, for one-time projects, things like that. So these three groups probably would not qualify to go to the community grants program and get funding. And I don't suspect the three of them either would fall under the grants committee. So I do want you to be aware of that there might not be another mechanism for us to get them grant dollars if they don't go through here.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McGough-Swain, Sam, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I think just my view generally on all this sort of stuff, council's role in this is policy, set the number, and then administration. You guys dived in and looked at it. You talked about a rubric. I've heard administration's thoughts around that, and generally that's just my position on it. I think it's a dangerous game to get in and start moving and tweaking things around. My view is administration's done a very good job of trying to allocate a small amount of funds to a lot of deserving organizations. And so for me, if I start tweaking that, I need to have some pretty strong justification, and I don't. So I prefer to stay with the administration's recommendation. I think you guys have done a fantastic job going through and explaining why, and not just taking it on the surface with one piece here. We've got all the information, but yeah, so I'm not in favor of tweaking, not a reflection of the organizations. I just think, as we mature into this, right, and we're not quite there, but as we mature into this, right, like it really should be, my vision for this is in 3 or 4 years down the road, we just give a number and administration processes those based on the number that we're prepared to give. So, that's just my view. The whole point of this was to avoid people coming in and saying, hey, I need 10K to go and do this, and making those one-off decisions, right? So I'll leave that there and just add my thanks for admin for all the work to get here. It's added a huge bump of professionalism to it versus us just kind of guessing up here. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newkirk. Stephen, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Well said, Councillor Moncalsway, and that's where my conversation, or where I was going to take conversation as well. When I was first elected, one of the things that I committed to was getting a process in place, because if you showed up on a Tuesday night with a PowerPoint presentation and you were first in line, you might have got more money than the second or the third. So we've evolved from that to the first iteration of the community grant funding policy into the second iteration of that now. And I really believe in empowerment and empowerment of committee, and I think we've really hit our stride in that committee empowerment piece. And for me, it's important for myself as a councillor to remain pretty consistent on this, and that's where my vote on this will go, is to follow the recommendations that are put out front, just to be consistent from the beginning of the process to now. My ask to Councillor Penrod would be, explain to me why one organization is more or less deserving than the other, but I actually don't think that's a fair question to even ask right now, because I don't know that you would have all that information in front of you anyways. So anyways, Mayor, my comments are, that I'm solid on the recommendations from administration here for the distribution of the 300,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I concur with both you and Councillor McGough-Swain's comments. I see no justification to allocate 5,000 to somebody else based on the application. I read them myself too, and I see no justification moving it around. And I fully support the recommendations of administration in this report, because it's very thorough, and they have done a very good job of allocating max amount of money to max amount of groups, possibly as per our policy. And we allocated the policy for a reason. And as my colleagues already mentioned, I'm not in support of changing anything in the allocations here. Seeing no further questions, Councillor Penrod, you have the suggestion. I'll give you one more last comment here, then I can move on to anybody else with a fresh comment on the topic.
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess I'll start by saying, really appreciate the comments from Councillor Moncalswain and Councillor Van Newkirk. Don't disagree with what you say. However, if none of us makes a suggestion tonight, then we don't have this conversation, right? And absolutely have a lot of respect for the recommendations that come forward from administration, but also know that we have a role in the process too, and we speak with and interact with and are accountable to the public in a different way than administration is. And so I think we do have some vital information and feedback to offer into the conversation. So that's my essential reason for asking the question, recommending a switch. Obviously not any kind of commentary on the worthiness of the organizations. In a perfect world, this stream would be funded at about $545,000-ish, because that's exactly what was applied for. And guess what? That probably wouldn't be enough the next year, because more would come in. So that takes us back to my original point tonight, which is I think that we need to be thinking about a plan for how to methodically increase this funding envelope, so that that's not a one-off decision every year at budget time, so that we actually have a methodical approach to how we're doing this work in the community as our community continues to grow and become more complex, and we can anticipate more worthy organizations making more worthy applications.
Okay, any further comments or questions?
Yeah, so the question for administration is just on page 7 of the report. There's the backgrounder that says this recommendation was developed based on the following considerations. First, positive impact on the community. Second, aligns with council's strategic objectives. Third, ensuring continuity to the previous funded groups. And fourth, allocate funds to the greatest number of groups. Do those 4 considerations, are they actually in the policy, C-52?
I don't believe those are. And I don't think there is like bullet statements as far as how to make the decision on major and operating grants. So these were the reason, what we used internally, administration, to make these decisions, to make this recommendation. I would have to go through the policy just probably with a fine-tooth comb to guarantee this, but I don't think that there is those standards. I think the policy just, the basic policy statements ensure an equitable, fair, transparent framework, increase effectiveness, reduce risk, those kind of things, your basic policy statements. So I don't think there is a very specific, like matrix as you were speaking, that laid out in the policy under major and operating. It is pretty big, where, you know, council reviews application, then council makes a decision. So
yeah.
it's essentially, we can work on maybe some tools and things that might be helpful, but these things are not directly stated in the policy.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. And I appreciate the transparency to put those 4 criterion in the report. At least people know then how they've been evaluated. So just as a final kind of response to some of the concerns that came forward from other councillors to my suggestion, I would fully support 3 of those 4 criteria. The first 3, they seem more than reasonable to me. We're measuring impact, we're measuring alignment with council strategic objectives, we're measuring continuity. So can we justify this year's decisions based on previous year's decisions, right? So that we're not just kind of zigzagging all over the road. However, the third, I think that I take some umbrage with, and that's just related to comments that we've had before. I don't believe that impact is perfectly elastic, and I already made the point. If I apply to make the numbers even simpler, if I apply for $100 and promise to deliver 100% of impact, if I receive $20, it doesn't automatically mean that my organization can deliver 20% of impact. And of course, the organization will have the opportunity to receive or not receive the grant. And I believe they would, in good faith, if they didn't feel like the amount offered could actually get a portion of the job done. And in fact, let me make this plug. We always say, please, when you're making your applications, avail yourself of the opportunity to appear before the committee, or in this case, council, so that you can provide clarifying answers to questions that we have. That's always a question that we ask, is if you don't receive the full amount of funding, how will that impact your project? So that's the rationale, not a commentary on worthiness of Drive Happiness as an organization. We have scarce resources. We can't fully fund all the requests. So in my mind, a better way to speak to impact is to actually more fully fund fewer projects.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further comments or questions, members of council, on the recommendation to council. Last call. Thank you. Would you please initiate the voting process on the recommendation to council before us on the screen? Phil, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor, and I think we're just getting it on the screen here. So as everyone knows, we had some wonderful weather the past week or so. Recently, due to unforeseen issues and severe inclement weather, Beaumont Transit was unable to meet the service standards of, first, buses running on time within a 5-minute window, And second, restoring service that is disrupted by unplanned outages or delays within 2 hours. So I noticed that piece isn't in there, we'll just add it. So the inquiry is to better understand the situation, and this is all in response to what council has heard from different residents over the past week. To better understand the situation and ensure rider expectations are being met, please provide the following information. First, any available data or reporting that provides insight into service reliability and uptime performance, including but not limited to missed trips, delayed trips, and other relevant indicators. And second, an overview of the current methods used to inform riders about service delays or disruptions, including whether any tools or services are available to provide proactive or real-time notifications.
I'll make this off myself. Any further councillor inquiries this evening? Seeing none? Council, we have no closed session items this evening. And with that, that brings our committee of the whole meeting to a conclusion of the agenda. And we are adjourned at 6:07 this evening. Thank you for attending and enjoy your evening.